This is the Rider Nation Podcast, an in-depth look at the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Here's your hosts, Maz and Justin Dunk.
Welcome to the Rider Nation Podcast. Chris Maz, Justin Dunk. The Riders lose again, this time in Toronto on a walk-off rouge. We'll get to that. A lot going on. Late game coaching decisions. Trevor Harris looking great, then going ice cold. Mark Mueller's play calling. Somehow the Riders are still first place in the West Division with the Labor Day Classic on tap with the surging Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Justin, the Riders, the walk-off rouge on a Lirim Hajrullahu 40-yard, what ends up being a single out of the end zone. Does the end of the game rouge need to be changed but stay in at other points in the game?
I think so. At the end of the game, I believe the rules should be a little bit different, especially when we're talking about a missed field goal. And the reason I say this, Maz, is because I think that you want to be rewarded for success. I'm not saying this because a lot of people in the United States, the Americans, were wondering what the heck was going on. I don't care what they think. I just think we need to reward success at the end of the game. And it was clear to me that Hajrullahu knew exactly what he was doing because he celebrated despite the field goal going wide. And you agree, obviously. So
this is Lirim. Yeah. This is Lirim Hajrullahu. He was running off the field giving guns like he somehow won. And it's funny, you talk about our American friends and neighbors. Of course, it makes every highlight show and every blog and every sports podcast going, did you see what just happened in the Canadian Football League? They missed a field goal, yet the team still won the game.
That's not the reason why we should change it, but I think what should be instituted here, and it likely wouldn't even be discussed until the offseason because that's what the CFL does with a lot of these things, is the fact that you can't win in an end-of-game situation unless you're, let's say, outside the 40 or 50-yard line. So this was a 40-yard field goal that Hajrullahu kicked on the fly through the end zone. That's a big boot. The end zones at BMO Field are a little smaller than they're supposed to be, but that's a long kick. Like, we're talking over 60 yards that ball flew in the air. So I think if we back it up a little bit and say, okay, you can't win the game on a missed field goal, and if you're going to try for a rouge, then you have to kind of force a team into that kick it in, kick it out situation, which all Canadians love. So I think you can put a yard line in there. Perhaps it's the 50-yard line, that if you're inside the 50-yard line, less than 3 minutes to go, you can't win the game with the rouge. If you're outside the 50-yard line, perhaps there's a chance.
Yeah, because not long after the end of the game, a lot of people posted on social media some kick-in, kick-out situations from the past. And I saw one where Wally Buono tried it against the Riders, against Paul McCallum, and the Riders were able to run it out. Game goes to overtime, and they end up winning. I think the late game decision, that's how they lost. I think the late day game decisions ended up costing the Riders this win. There were some questionable things at the end of the game. Do you think that Corey Mace may have had his worst game as a coach, especially there late in that fourth quarter?
Possibly, and we're probably being hard on Coach Mace, but this stuff gets magnified when you start the season 4-0, then you have a stretch now where for over a month the team hasn't won a football game. They've got a tie in there,
yes,
as we all know, in Ottawa, but they haven't won a football game. So, I do believe when you look at the timeout on the sideline that I'd like to have an explanation for that, because it seemed like Mark Mueller got the play in, Trevor Harris completed that pass to Kean Schaefer-Baker for what looked like a first down, and I feel like the hindsight gets Rider Nation all up in arms when these kind of things happen, because they say, well, why'd you call the timeout? Kean Schaefer-Baker had a first down. It's like, he didn't know that before the timeout came from the sideline. So I would want an explanation there before I analyze it. But I think where you can really dig in here is the fact that it was 2nd and 17 again after the timeout, and that the Riders were trying to get the first down. I'm not faulting that, because they like the aggressiveness. But if you look at the situation, if you go with a run play, or even if you go with a high percentage pass play, a screen, or something of the like, then you have the opportunity to run the clock almost all the way down. And the Argos are going to, if they even have a shot with time left on the clock, have to kick the field goal if they take back possession over of the football. Honestly, and I think Trevor Harris would agree, that sack on first down just cannot happen. Okay, that put them really up against it and in that second and long situation. But yes, I do think that late game decision making gets magnified, especially in a loss and during a losing stretch.
Okay, so what's worse? If there's two decisions by Corey Mace, there's the timeout, which nullified the first down, or take it back to the tying field goal. It was 3rd and 15 for the Toronto Argonauts, and the Riders decide to play a soft zone and give a 17-yard cushion. Isn't there and I know we play a lot of zone, and a lot of teams do in the CFL. If you're Mace, wouldn't you be like, we're playing press man. If they beat us, but we cannot give them a 15-yard cushion? Because I think that is, and that killed all the momentum that they had.
I don't think you can play press man in that situation because of how everything was at that point in the ball game. But I would suspect, and without knowing the play call, I usually hesitate to do this, but in defense of Coach Mace, that there was supposed to be some type of low defender in that zone. And that the way they set up kind of that line across the field was right at the sticks, and those defensive backs got pushed off the sticks where they were 15 yards down the field from the line of scrimmage, and gave David Unger the ability to make that completion from Chad Kelly, which looked easy. But when you have some of the other clear out routes and you don't want a deep ball to get down there, it's understandable. So I would imagine that the play call was probably solid. And there probably was supposed to be a low defender there to hang with that, we'll call it a deep hitch route or a hook route. So I think probably something happened within the call. I don't want to call it a bust, but that there was an error made.
It just seems that if the Riders were 3rd and 15, they wouldn't usually ever get those cushions. I know a lot of people that just in rewatching the game, and it takes a lot to go back and rewatch, especially when you know what the outcome's going to be. When we were punting out of the end zone, we snapped the ball with 14 seconds left on the play clock. We could have ran that down. Is that more situational football that Mason and company we got to live and learn? Because there again, if you're got to give the ball back with as little time as possible, because you know that they were going to get good field position.
That's the type of stuff, right, that has to be aware and said to Adam Korsak. And maybe it was, and perhaps there was some miscommunication there, or he snapped it early. But that's the kind of stuff that you have to get right. And this is the kind of stuff that people are going to dissect when you have a near loss like that, that compared to the start of the game, Maz, the Riders were up and in control of that football game. And I felt like kind of as it went along, gave the Argos life, gave it away in a sense that was another great defensive performance. Special teams played well for the most part. Brett Lauther bounces back. And the offense, I felt like, didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And yet they still had a chance to win it at the end of the game.
So does Mark Mueller have to answer for some of the play calls? But like I said, at the start of the game, things were going, we were rolling. And then about midway through the second quarter, either the Riders fell off or the Toronto defense all of a sudden woke up. But some of those calls, and probably the two that would, red flags, those interceptions when we were in the end zone and those play calls, like you talked earlier, some safe stuff over the middle where you're throwing the wide side outs where it has a chance to be picked. Is Mueller got to own part of this loss?
I'm sure he will, but as Trevor Harris has said, he believes within Mark Mueller's offense, there's an answer for everything that the defense is going to throw at them. So I really felt like those two interceptions came as a result of pressure in Trevor Harris's face, and the fact that both of those footballs probably never should have been thrown. Now, pressure changes things, and it's easy for us to sit here and say, Trevor Harris never should have thrown those footballs, and it's easy in hindsight when we watch all the replays, right? But when you have somebody bearing down on you, and you're not wanting to take a sack close to your own end zone, you're trying to make a fast decision. Some people might say, well, yeah, you should just eat it. There's also the danger of that safety there. So I don't think that I would put those interceptions so much on Mark Mueller as I would the offensive line. I think has to be a little bit better in those situations. And Trevor Harris, I think, would admit that, first of all, he's needed to get the ball out of his hands faster when he recognizes that pressure or a free defender coming at him. And I think he would also tell you that those throws never should have been let go to the intended targets on those plays. I think he could tell you what he was thinking, especially on the deep shot down the right sideline. But those throws, I think, are on Trevor Harris and the pressure that he was facing.
Do you think he looked a little tentative in this game at times, like worried? Because it sure looked that way from 10,000 feet and watching on TV.
I don't think he looked worried. The first 20 minutes or so, he was on point. The ball was coming out in rhythm, on time. There were throws to different levels of the football field, and there were two elite corner throws that stuck out to me that not many quarterbacks in this league can make. That corner ball is a specialty. We saw Ricky Ray do it in this league for years. Zach Collaros is especially adept at it. And then I don't want to say there aren't too many other quarterbacks in the league that can't make that throw, because I think they all have the ability to, but Trevor Harris did it multiple times, dropping it into tight coverage in the absolute perfect spot. So let's not forget that when we talk about the difference in the Argos defense and what they did to Harris after that. They started to put more players in coverage, rushed 3 or 4 defenders, and at times, yes, they did send pressure in his face, which caused those 2 interceptions. But I think they caused him to try to hold the football longer, got him off his rhythm, and that to me was really the key for what bogged down the offense. I'd be interested to hear what Trevor Harris would say upon film review, and even Mark Mueller. I still think when you see those kinds of coverages with 8 or 9 guys back there, that the ball has to come out on time. But it did look like he was, I will say, fairly out of rhythm for the back part of that game.
And I think the lack of mobility, just with the injuries, and defenses know that, they can pin their ears back. Dante Myers, to me, and I know that there's still some football to play, Rider Rookie of the Year, he's outstanding. Shawn Bane is MIA. If there were still milk cartons and you could put faces on there of people that have gone missing, what has happened to Shawn Bane's game? Just the production is just not there anymore.
I mean, it's not 3 touchdowns in a game production like the first game of the season, but I know what you mean, the consistency. But I think what's actually happened here is that, since he was out of the lineup, there have been some players emerge. You talked about Dante Myers. He's been there since Shawn Bane has come back, but I think Sam Emilus has really stepped up. Joe has won the hearts of Rider Nation and, potentially even the coaching staff. We've seen Keyshawn Johnson emerge. Kean Schaefer-Baker comes back. There's lots of targets in this offense. And we haven't even talked about Jarrett Stearns, who's not even on the roster at the current moment, I think largely because of the play of Dante Myers. So it would be nice to see some of those Shawn Bane vertical stretch plays like we saw in that first week in Edmonton, but you also can't just be throwing the football up. So I think this is a case of there's lots of weapons. Trevor Harris is a guy that likes to spread the football around, and he's not going to force anything. Do we want to see Shawn Bane Jr.'s production be more than it has been of late? Certainly, yes. But if you look at that Montreal game, the production of the passing game, 355 yards from Trevor Harris in his first start back, coming off the 6-game injured list, I think he can be actually taking attention onto himself to help open up some of these other guys. That's something I think we often forget.
Now, I know we're here. This is the Rider Nation podcast, and we're talking about the Riders and Riders losing. But the other big story, Chad Kelly's first game back after the 9-game suspension. And although he didn't look good in the first half, he made enough plays in the second half. And I forgot how elusive he can be. Riders got pressure, but he found a way. And I know there's a lot of people that they've taken the sides. They're either on the one side, he should be playing, or he shouldn't be playing. Let's look at the football side of things in him in the game. Was Dinwiddie wrong to start him over Cameron Dukes, given what he can offer?
I don't think so from the football side of things, and I don't think whatever side you're on based on the lawsuit and everything that's come in terms of the fallout from it, that you could deny that Chad Kelly is the best quarterback on the Toronto Argonauts roster. That, to me, isn't really up for debate. There was perhaps a chance there when Cameron Dukes started the season 2-0, but he wasn't able to keep that going, as much as there were some people in the Argos fan base that would have liked to see Cameron Dukes do that and have the ability for the Argos to potentially make a decision on Chad Kelly. I don't think that was ever the case. We talked to Ryan Dinwiddie when he came into Regina, and he was honest. He said if Chad Kelly is reinstated, he's our starting quarterback. Now, the Argos have dealt with the PR blowback, but to your point, to just talk about the football, after a rough start, and the Riders were mixing it up on them, sending pressure, getting home with their defensive ends. Like Brian Cox Jr., I thought played a really good game, especially at the start. Micah Johnson was beasting again on that defensive line. Miles Brown delivered a big-time shot on Chad Kelly that he was whining about trying to get a call, but that was a perfectly clean hit. But Kelly showed you his mental fortitude, staying strong, staying with it, throws for over 300 yards, 24 of 39, one interception in the game, but ultimately did enough to get his team the victory. And I think that when you look at his situation, he was able to come back and get off to a faster restart, we'll call it, than Nathan Rourke in BC, because he's still been communicating with Ryan Dinwiddie, who's the offensive coordinator as well, and Mike Miller, the quarterback's coach. So he's still been ingrained in the offense. He just hadn't been practicing day-to-day with the team up until the week leading into the Riders game.
Well, only in the CFL. Normally, for a lot of years, the East Division has been the weak link and the West Division has been dominant. But for whatever reason, that is not the case this year. Somehow, some way, between the East Division and the football gods, after the Riders start 4-0, they go 1-5-1, still in first place because the Ottawa Red Blacks beat the BC Lions. So now Labor Day Classic, Riders-Bombers. It's a first-place showdown. The Bombers are surging after starting 0-4, and they're going in the right direction. What has to happen Sunday at Mosaic for the Riders to beat this Winnipeg team, who is only getting better?
The offense flat out has to be better. On a per-game basis, the Blue Bombers' defense is the best in the league, and they still were playing pretty good football despite that slow start that was more on the offense. And Zach Collaros and Kenny Lawler was out. He got hurt in that first game, and then he hasn't really had Dalton Schoen for the majority of the season. He's going to be out for the year. So I feel like Kenny Lawler coming back to the lineup has been a big boost for the Bombers' offense. Brady Oliveira has got it rolling. But to me, this game comes down to the consistency from the Riders' offense, because we've seen it by and large part from special teams, which I don't want people to forget, that outside of one really bad game, Brett Lauther has been consistent. Mario Alford, I felt like throughout this season, he's definitely flashed the ability to have those returns, and he's gotten at least one back, if I remember right, to the house, and I think it's a couple have come back on penalties. So it's the offense. I think the offense needs to play a more consistent football game over 60 minutes, because if they have been able to do that over this last stretch where they've gone winless, I think the Riders, could potentially be a couple games up in the West Division, not sitting here tied at least in the win column with Winnipeg. They do have the tiebreaker, which is fortunate, and they also have that tie point, which right now puts them in first place. So I think they got to be able to try to run the football consistently, and Trevor Harris needs to be in that rhythm for the entire game. Easier said than done, because I think the Bombers have right now arguably, and I don't even know if it's much of an argument, the best secondary in the league, but the Riders have weapons as well. So you want to see Trevor Harris in rhythm, getting the football out on time consistently throughout the game.
I think that we need touchdowns when we get to the red zone, because field goals aren't going to cut it, because we've seen this from Winnipeg. Even when they were losing, they can go 2-3 plays and march down the field. Field goals are not going to cut it. You mentioned Brett Lauther, who did have a bounce-back game, and I know a lot of people in Rider Nation were panicking. And the Roland Milligans, the Malik Carneys, and the Jameer Thurmans are going to have a great game. Brady Oliveira always seems to play well against the Riders, and 2-0 is nice, but we have to split. We don't do well in the Banjo Bowl rematch situation, so we have to win this game at home. But I think as we're taping this, less than a couple hundred seats left. Going to be the first sellout in a year at Mosaic Stadium. And it's loud there. It's been loud, but I can't, that atmosphere on Labor Day. Because have you ever been to a game on Labor Day in Regina?
Not yet.
Okay.
First time.
So it goes from here. and then you add in some liquor here, and then the craziness to here, and it just ramps and ramps and ramps. And the best part is the noise, and just that there's always atmosphere at games, but with the Labor Day game, you'll just feel, even when you first walk in, there's a certain buzz, not only throughout the city, but in the building, and it's hard for it to not be contagious. I mean, look at even a few years ago when Duke Williams was fighting people on the sideline during the Labor Day game because he was so caught up in it. We're going to have to play a great game in all three phases, and I think that's what it's going to take. All right, it's the latest edition of the Rider Nation podcast. Hey, if you like what you see, what you hear, give us a like on YouTube and hit the subscribe button. We appreciate it. Haven't won in a month. The 1-5-1 streak needs to come to an end. Oh, are you? We'll wrap on this. Before the season started to where they are now, are the Riders right where you thought they would be, better or worse?
It depends how you look at it. First place in the West Division is great, but 5-5-1, I thought they would have a winning record going into Labor Day, just based on the feel and the energy around the team. That said, Trevor Harris was out for 6 of those games, and I thought Shea Patterson was solid, if unspectacular, in place of Harris. So I think when you look at this overall, they're really, all that matters is the standings. You're in first place. Would you rather have a winning record? I'm sure Rider Nation would say yes.
That'll do it. Another edition of the Rider Nation podcast. Thanks.
The Rider Nation podcast. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to sportscage.com.